Get out, trash! Sterling Blackwood's hands slammed into Mason's shoulders, shoving the 16-year-old black girl backward with brutal force. She stumbled, and in that split second, Sterling's other hand shot out and slapped the grease-stained notebook from her grip. The worn leather journal, Calvin Harris's life's work, spun through the air and hit the fountain with a violent splash. 40 pages of a dead mechanic's genius floated in chlorinated water like garbage while his daughter stood frozen, watching her father's legacy drown. "Security! Get this homeless filth away from my Bugatti!" Sterling's face was crimson, veins pulsing at his temples. He wiped his hands on a silk handkerchief as if touching Mason had contaminated him. "Before I call the police!" 200 elite guests stood paralyzed, champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips. Phones emerged from designer clutches, already recording. The annual Concord d'Elegance charity gala, $10,000 per ticket, had just turned into something raw and ugly, happening live under crystal chandeliers. Mason's younger sister Keisha screamed from behind the iron gates, "That's our dad's notebook! Give it back!" She lunged forward, but a security guard caught her arm, yanking her back like she was dangerous. Sterling spun toward his audience with theatrical disgust. "This is what happens when bleeding hearts say we should help the homeless. They don't want help, they want to steal from us." He gestured at Mason like evidence at a trial. "Look at this creature. Filthy clothes, hasn't bathed in months, and she dares touch a $40 million automobile?" The word creature hung in the air like a slap. Mason's legs shook, but she forced herself to stand upright. Her shoulders throbbed where his hands had connected. Around her, 200 faces stared with expressions ranging from horror to discomfort to, worse, barely hidden satisfaction. No one intervened. No one ever did. "Tell me, girl," Sterling continued, voice dripping with mock curiosity. "What kind of parents raise a daughter who begs at rich people's gates? Oh, wait, let me guess. No parents at all?" Mike Coleman, the security guard who'd unlocked the gate for Mason 5 minutes earlier, stepped between them. "Sir, she was trying to help with the engine." "Help?" Sterling's laugh was surgical in its cruelty. "A homeless black girl thinks she understands vintage automotive engineering?" He spread his arms to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been doing this all wrong. Forget MIT, forget master mechanics. We should recruit from tent cities." Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the guests, uncomfortable, complicit, damning. This catastrophe had begun 3 hours earlier. Sterling's crown jewel, the 1936 Bugatti Type 56 SC Atlantic, had refused to start. His master mechanic Gary Wilson had checked every system twice: fuel delivery, ignition, electrical pathways, compression. Every diagnostic showed green. The engine still sat dead as stone, mocking them while the clock ticked toward Sterling's promised grand finale exhibition drive. Sterling had announced a $50,000 bounty to anyone who could revive the car in 60 minutes. "Cash tonight," he'd proclaimed, checkbook held high. It was supposed to be entertaining. Watch wealthy hobbyists fail, then watch Gary's team succeed just before the deadline. Except nobody was succeeding. 40 minutes remained, and Sterling Blackwood's meticulously orchestrated evening was collapsing into very public humiliation. That's when Mason had recognized the symptoms from outside the estate gates. The way Gary checked fuel lines repeatedly. The confused head-scratching. The growing desperation. She'd seen it all before in her father's annotations. Vapor lock and pressurized fuel systems. The Atlantic series' infamous flaw. Calvin Harris had documented this exact problem, complete with diagnostic protocols and solutions. Mason had studied those pages until she could recite them blind. She knew she could fix it. Mike Coleman had seen the certainty burning in her eyes and made a choice. He'd unlocked the gate. "One shot, kid. Don't waste it." Mason had approached the crowd of failing mechanics, notebook clutched like armor. She'd opened her mouth to offer help, and Sterling had attacked like a snake. Now Vivian, Sterling's girlfriend and social media influencer with 3 million followers, glided closer with her phone angled perfectly. Her live stream was exploding, 85,000 viewers, and climbing. The chat was molten with outrage. "Baby," she whispered, touching his arm. "Maybe we should just—" "No." Sterling's eyes never left Mason. "I want everyone to witness what happens when people forget their place." He took 2 steps closer, his Italian leather shoes stopping inches from Mason's duct-taped sneakers. "You think poverty makes you special, girl? You think desperation equals talent?" His voice dropped to something venomous. "Let me educate you. There are people who create value in this world, people who build empires, people who matter." He paused. "And then there are parasites like you." Mason's fists clenched. In the fountain behind Sterling, her father's notebook was disintegrating, 15 years of Calvin Harris's brilliance bleeding into ink clouds, the custom fuel pressure gauge diagrams dissolving, the Atlantic Series vapor lock solutions washing away. Her father's final note, "Broken things can be fixed, broken people can too," now impossible to read. Something inside Mason didn't break. It hardened into steel. She lifted her eyes to meet Sterling Blackwood's, this man who destroyed lives and called it business, and spoke with a clarity that silenced the entire courtyard. "My father was Calvin Harris, master mechanic. He restored that exact Bugatti 15 years ago, before you framed him for embezzlement to hide your charity fraud." The crowd gasped like one organism. Vivian's phone nearly slipped from her fingers. Gary Wilson's head snapped up, his face going pale. That name clearly meant something terrible to him. Sterling's expression cycled through shock, rage, then panic before settling on cold calculation. "You're a liar." "The engine won't start because of vapor lock," Mason cut him off, voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "Pressurized fuel system. Temperature differential creates vapor bubbles that block fuel flow. Classic Atlantic Series flaw. My father documented the solution. Takes 12 minutes to fix. I can do it in 8. 3 seconds of absolute silence stretched like broken glass. Then Sterling smiled, predatory, delighted, already tasting her certain public failure. "Fine. Prove it, street rat. You've got 10 minutes. Mason wiped her wet hands on her jeans and walked toward the Bugatti. The crowd parted like she carried a disease. Then she did something no mechanic had tried all night. She opened the trunk, not the hood. The crowd murmured in confusion. Gary Wilson stepped forward, his professional pride momentarily overriding his fear. "Kid, the engine's in the front. The trunk is where my father hid his emergency toolkit 15 years ago." Mason's hands moved with surgical precision, feeling along the trunk's felt lining. Her fingers found a seam that shouldn't exist. She pulled, and a hidden panel popped open, revealing a compact leather pouch wrapped in protective cloth. The crowd pressed closer. Vivian's phone captured every movement, her viewer count spiking to 120,000. The chat exploded. "What is that? Hidden compartment? This girl came prepared!" Mason unwrapped the pouch. Inside, a custom fuel pressure gauge, a specialized vapor release valve, and a handwritten card in her father's distinctive scrawl. "For the day they realize they need you, Dad." Her hands trembled holding that card. Calvin Harris had known. Somehow he'd known this moment would come. Sterling's face had gone from smug to uncertain. That's my property. Anything in that car belongs to—" "This toolkit was installed in 2010, Mason interrupted, her voice stronger now. 6 months before you fired my father. Before you erased him." She held up the pressure gauge. "This is the only tool that can diagnose vapor lock in the Atlantic Series. Your expensive mechanics don't have it because my father invented it." Gary's face went white as chalk. He recognized that tool. He'd seen Calvin use it. The countdown timer on the platform's digital display glared red. 009:42 remaining. Sterling's jaw clenched. "Fine. You have your little toys. You still have to actually fix the car, street rat. And when you fail, and you will fail, I'm having you arrested for theft of that toolkit." Mason locked eyes with him. "When I succeed, you pay 50,000 in front of everyone, on camera." "When you fail," Sterling countered, his smile returning, "you apologize to every person here for wasting our time, on your knees." The crowd gasped. Vivian's chat went ballistic. Even some guests looked uncomfortable with that demand. Mason's sister Keisha screamed from the gates, "Don't do it, Mason. He's trying to humiliate you." Mason looked at the toolkit, then at the Bugatti, then back at Sterling. "Deal," she said, and the timer hit 090 o'clock. Mason popped the Bugatti's hood. The engine bay gleamed under the spotlights, a masterpiece of pre-war engineering that had cost more to restore than most people earned in a lifetime. Dual overhead camshafts, hand-assembled cylinder heads, polished aluminum manifolds that reflected her face back at her like a funhouse mirror. Her father had touched every piece of this. 15 years ago, his hands had rebuilt this exact engine. Now, his daughter's hands would save it. The countdown timer glared. 08:43. Mason's fingers traced the fuel lines with eerie confidence. Muscle memory inherited through late nights in her father's garage. Back when they had a garage, back when they had anything. The primary fuel pump checked normal. Secondary delivery system, normal. But there, her fingers stopped on the pressurized feed line connecting the tank to the carburetor. "Temperature differential," she murmured, more to herself than the crowd pressing uncomfortably close. She pulled out her father's custom pressure gauge, a brass and copper instrument that looked like Victorian steampunk next to the Bugatti's Art Deco elegance. Gary Wilson watched from 10 feet away, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. When Mason reached for the connection point, he stepped forward with a wrench. "You'll need this. The fitting is custom threaded." Mason took it. The weight felt wrong immediately. She looked down. It was a 7/16 wrench. The Atlantic series used 11mm metric fittings. This wrench wouldn't even grip properly, would strip the threads if she forced it. Gary had just tried to sabotage her. Mason's eyes lifted to meet his. For one heartbeat they stared at each other, her confusion morphing into understanding, his guilt barely concealed behind professional neutrality. "Thanks," she said quietly, setting the wrong wrench aside. "But I'll use my own tools." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a bent coat hanger, straightened and filed to a precise taper. The crowd murmured, some with derision, others with fascination. Vivian's live stream chat exploded. "A coat hanger? Is she serious? This girl's crazy." 07:55 on the timer. Mason slid the makeshift tool into the pressure release valve, feeling for the internal mechanism. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Expensive tools impress people. Simple tools solve problems." Click. The valve was unseated. A hiss of pressurized vapor escaped, not explosive, but sustained and telling. Mason grabbed the pressure gauge and connected it to the diagnostic port. The needle swung hard right. 85 psi, nearly triple the normal operating pressure. "Vapor lock confirmed," she announced, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "The fuel system's been building pressure all evening. That's why your diagnostics showed green. Electrically, everything's perfect. Mechanically, it's choking itself." A businessman in the crowd, expensive suit, Rolex catching the light, leaned toward his companion. "How does a homeless girl know this?" Because my father was a master, Mason wanted to scream. Because he spent 15 years documenting problems rich people's mechanics couldn't solve. Because he created solutions they're still using without crediting him. But she stayed silent and kept working. 07:12 remaining. That's when Keisha somehow slipped past the security perimeter. Mason's 12-year-old sister squeezed through the crowd, breathless and determined, carrying something heavy wrapped in a tattered blanket. "You forgot this!" Keisha thrust the bundle into Mason's hands. Mason unwrapped it, and her breath caught. Their father's old toolbox. The red metal case with C. Harris stenciled in white paint, scratched and dented from decades of use. She'd thought it was lost, thrown away with everything else when they'd been evicted.
"I hid it," Keisha whispered, tears in her eyes. "After Dad died, I knew we'd need it someday."
Inside the toolbox, the fuel pressure regulator adapter their father had machined himself. The exact tool she needed. The crowd's energy shifted, some faces softening at the sight of two homeless girls clinging to their father's memory through tools. Others remained hard, skeptical, waiting for failure. Sterling Blackwood was on his phone, texting furiously. His face had gone from amused to concerned to something approaching alarm. 06:38 on the clock. Mason connected the adapter to the fuel system. Now came the delicate part, bleeding the vapor lock without flooding the carburetor. Too fast, and fuel would cascade into the intake manifold. Too slow, and the pressure wouldn't equalize before time ran out. Her hands moved in a dance she'd practiced 1,000 times on junkyard engines. The release valve opens 3 turns. Wait for the hiss to stabilize. Close 1 turn, monitor the gauge, monitor. The pressure began dropping. 85 psi, 72, 58. Gary Wilson stepped closer, ostensibly to observe. His coffee cup tilted. Just slightly, just enough. Hot liquid spilled across Mason's toolkit, soaking into the blanket, splashing dangerously close to the open fuel line. "Oh God, I'm so sorry!" Gary jumped back, his performance Oscar-worthy. "I didn't see. Let me help clean." But Mason had seen it. The deliberate angle, the calculated clumsiness. This wasn't an accident. "You sabotaged it, didn't you?" Mason's voice was low, meant only for Gary. "Not just now. Earlier. You're the reason the engine wouldn't start in the first place." Gary's face cracked. Guilt flooded his features before he could mask it. "Kid, I don't know what you—" "Yes, you do." Mason didn't raise her voice, but her words cut like surgical steel. "My father trained you, didn't he? Before Sterling fired him. You know this system. You know exactly where to create a vapor lock that looks like natural failure." 05:49 remaining. In the crowd, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and calculating eyes watched the interaction intently. Vincent Crawford, Sterling's business rival, owner of Crawford Tech Industries. He'd been on his phone all evening, his thumbs flying across the screen with increasing urgency. A server's tray bumped his elbow. His phone tumbled to the marble, unlocked, screen visible. Mike Coleman, walking the perimeter, saw it. Saw the text message thread. Saw Vincent's last message to Gary Wilson, sent 3 days ago. "Sabotage the Bugatti. Make Sterling look incompetent. $25K on completion. Merger vote is Monday." Mike's eyes went wide. This wasn't just about a car. This was corporate warfare, and Gary had been the hired weapon. Mike scooped up the phone, handed it back to Vincent with a pointed look. "Careful, sir. Wouldn't want anyone seeing something incriminating." Vincent's face went ashen. He understood the implication. Mike had seen. Mike knew. Mike, 05:02 on the timer. Mason ignored the spilled coffee soaking through her jeans. She repositioned her tools, checked the pressure gauge, 44 psi, 38, 32. Gary stood paralyzed, his guilt and fear warring visibly on his face. Mason could see it now, the tremor in his hands, the sweat on his forehead despite the cool evening air. This man had compromised everything he believed in for money. And now, a 16-year-old girl was unraveling both the mechanical sabotage and the moral one. "Why?" Mason asked, still working, her hands steady even as her heart raced. "Was it worth it? Whatever they paid you?" Gary's voice cracked. "You don't understand. I have aging parents, medical bills. Sterling pays well, but not enough for Hop." He stopped himself. This kid, Vincent Crawford, he offered me money I couldn't refuse, said it was just a prank just to make the car fail for one evening, make Sterling look bad in front of investors. A prank that destroys my father's legacy, Mason said quietly. Again. The pressure gauge hit 28 psi, almost in the safe zone. Mason began the repriming sequence, her father's instructions playing in her head like a recording. Prime slowly, let the fuel find its path. Rushing creates air pockets. 0415. Remaining. The engine coughed once, a single sputtering rotation that sent a jolt through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. Vivian's live stream viewer count hit 340,000. The chat was a waterfall of disbelief and excitement. Gary took a step back, his face a mixture of shame and dawning realization. This girl, this homeless, powerless girl he'd dismissed, was actually going to succeed. She was going to expose his sabotage simply by fixing what he'd broken. Mike Coleman moved to stand between Gary and Mason, his body language clear, no more interference. Sterling Blackwood's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a text from Vincent Crawford. Stop her, whatever it takes. The deal falls apart if the car starts. Sterling's eyes darted to the Bugatti's dashboard. Hidden among the vintage gauges was a modern addition, a kill switch disguised as a diagnostic sensor, a failsafe he'd installed for security purposes. One press would cut all electrical power to the engine, untraceable, instant. His hand drifted toward the dashboard. 0348 on the timer. Mason primed the fuel system one final time. The pressure gauge read 22 psi. Perfect. She disconnected her tools, wiped her hands on her already soaked jeans, and moved to the driver's seat. The crowd held its collective breath. 200 people, silent as stone. Mason's hand gripped the original Bugatti starter button, a chrome-plated switch on the dashboard that had launched this engine to life 1,000 times before. Sterling's fingers were inches from the kill switch. His entire body tensed. The choice was his. Let the car start and admit a homeless girl outsmarted his mechanics, or kill the power and save face, preserve his image, protect his merger. 0321. Remaining. Mason pressed the starter. The engine turned over once, twice. A cough, a sputter, a mechanical clearing of its throat after hours of silence. Then, the Bugatti roared to life. $40 million of automotive history screamed its resurrection into the Beverly Hills night. The sound was symphonic, 8 cylinders firing in perfect sequence, exhaust notes cascading through custom headers, the whole machine vibrating with furious, beautiful purpose. The crowd erupted. Cheers, gasps, applause that shook the chandeliers. Vivian's live stream chat became incomprehensible, a blur of celebration emojis and shock. Mason sat in the driver's seat, hands still on the wheel, tears streaming down her face. Gary Wilson stood frozen, the full weight of his betrayal crushing down on him. He'd been paid to sabotage a car. Instead, he'd tried to sabotage a girl who'd just proven herself more capable than he'd ever be. And Sterling Blackwood's hand hovered over the kill switch, 1 second too late. The engine purred like a satisfied predator, but Sterling's smile was predatory in a different way. Congratulations, street rat. Now let's discuss that toolkit you stole from my trunk. The Bugatti's engine purred like a satisfied lion. Mason climbed out of the driver's seat, her legs barely supporting her weight. She'd done it. Against every odd, every insult, every act of sabotage, she'd resurrected $40 million of automotive history with a coat hanger and her father's forgotten tools. The crowd's applause was deafening. Vivian's live stream had exploded to 520,000 viewers. The chat was a tidal wave. Give her the money. This girl's a genius. Sterling better pay up. Sterling approached slowly, his face unreadable. He pulled out his checkbook with deliberate ceremony, holding it high so every camera could see. The crowd's cheers intensified. They wanted their feel-good ending, their viral moment of justice served. "You've earned this, girl," Sterling said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. His pen touched the paper, then stopped. His eyes locked onto something in Mason's hand, the soggy, disintegrating toolkit card. Her father's handwriting, even water-damaged, was distinctive. Calvin Harris's precise mechanical lettering, the way he always drew his H with that extra flourish. Sterling's expression shifted like a mask cracking. "Wait." He stepped closer, snatched the card from Mason's grip. "This handwriting, I recognize it." Mason's stomach dropped. "No, not now. Not when she was so close." "Where did you say you got this toolkit?" Sterling's voice had gone cold, calculated. "My father—" "Your father's name. Say it again." "Calvin Harris." Mason's voice came out smaller than she wanted. The crowd murmured. That name meant nothing to them, but to Sterling Blackwood it clearly meant everything. His face cycled through recognition, then shock, then something dangerous. When he spoke again, his voice was ice wrapped in silk. "Calvin Harris, my former head mechanic, the man who tried to extort me 15 years ago. The man I fired for embezzlement." "That's a lie," Mason started, but Sterling talked over her. "This toolkit, these tools, they were part of my restoration project. Company property. When your father was terminated, he was supposed to return everything." Sterling's smile was terrible now, victorious. "Instead, he stole them, hid them in my car, and now you, his little accomplice, are using stolen property to claim expertise you don't have." The crowd's energy shifted. Uncertainty rippled through the guests. Was this a triumph or a theft? A skilled mechanic or a con artist's daughter? Mason's world was tilting. "My father didn't steal anything. He built this toolkit. He invented that pressure gauge because you were too cheap to buy proper diagnostic equipment." "Convenient story." Sterling turned to address the crowd. "A homeless girl shows up with inherited knowledge from a disgraced employee. Knowledge she claims is hers, but is really my intellectual property." He pocketed the card. "Security. Escort them out. No payment. And I want that toolkit confiscated as stolen goods." The crowd gasped. Vivian's livestream chat went ballistic. "No! This is wrong! She fixed your car! Pay her!" But Sterling was already moving, his PR machine spinning. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. We've been deceived by a skilled performance, but theft is theft, regardless of how talented the thief appears." Keisha screamed from the crowd, "You're a liar! You destroyed our dad! You killed him!" Her raw, 12-year-old pain cut through the courtyard like a knife. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others pulled out their phones, sensing the story wasn't over. Mason stood paralyzed. She'd fixed the car. She'd proven her expertise. She'd done everything right, and Sterling was still going to win. Because he always won. Because men like him wrote the rules and rewrote history to suit their narrative. "Your father was a thief," Sterling said quietly, just loud enough for Mason to hear. "And so are you. Security?" Mike Coleman's radio crackled to life. "Coleman, escort the trespassers off the property. Use force if necessary." Mike's hand moved to his radio. His finger hovered over the transmit button. The correct response was simple. "Copy that. Acknowledge orders. Remove the homeless girls. Restore order. Keep his job." But Mike's finger didn't press the button. Instead, he turned to Mason and said 5 words that changed everything. "Tell them what he did." Mason's shock crystallized into something harder. Something her father had carried until it killed him. Righteous fury at injustice that wore expensive suits and called itself success. "Tell them what you did," Mike repeated, louder this time. His radio still crackled with demands from other security, but he didn't respond. Instead, he positioned himself between Mason and Sterling like a human shield. Mason's voice came out steady, amplified by pure rage. My father was no thief. He was your lead mechanic, the man who restored this Bugatti from scrap metal to perfection. And when he discovered you were using charity auctions to launder money, inflating valuations, pocketing donations, you destroyed him. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Phones shifted from recording the car to recording this confrontation. Sterling's face flushed crimson. This is slander! Security, I want her removed now! You framed him for embezzlement. Mason's voice cracked but didn't break. You planted false invoices. You forged signatures. You had him arrested, knowing the charges wouldn't stick, but knowing the accusation would destroy his career forever. Keisha pushed through the crowd to stand beside her sister, tears streaming down her face but her voice fierce. He died believing he was worthless. Our dad died thinking he'd failed us because of your lies. The raw pain in a 12-year-old's voice silenced even Sterling momentarily. Vivian's livestream viewer count hit 890,000. The chat was no longer just watching. They were witnessing something that felt dangerous, real, unscripted. That notebook you threw in the fountain? Mason continued, her voice gaining strength from her sister's courage. Every page was documentation. Every restoration note included warnings about your fraud scheme. He documented everything, and you couldn't risk him going public, so you destroyed him instead. Sterling laughed, cold, calculated. A convenient story from a desperate child. But I have lawyers, I have documentation. You have nothing but accusations and stolen tools. She has me. Gary Wilson stepped forward, his face pale but determined. The master mechanic who'd sabotaged the Bugatti, who'd tried to trip up Mason, who'd spent years being complicit, finally choosing a side. What? Sterling's confidence cracked. Gary pulled out his phone with trembling hands. I have recordings, 3 days of text messages and voice calls from Vincent Crawford. He held up the screen so the nearest cameras could see. He paid me $25,000 to sabotage the Bugatti, make you look incompetent before Monday's merger vote. The crowd gasped. Vincent Crawford, who'd been lurking at the edges, went white as a sheet. Gary's voice strengthened as he continued. But it's not just about tonight. Vincent mentioned your other creative accounting, the charity fraud, the inflated valuations. He has proof, Sterling. He's been gathering evidence for months, planning to use it against you. Vincent bolted, just turned and ran through the crowd like a man on fire. 2 security guards moved to intercept, but Mike Coleman's voice stopped them. Let him go. FBI will want him later. Sterling's world was collapsing in real time. Gary, you're fired. You can't fire me for telling the truth. Gary turned to Mason, his eyes pleading for forgiveness he hadn't earned. This kid, this incredible kid, just showed me what real integrity looks like. She risked everything to defend her father's name. While I sold mine for money I can't even spend without shame. Mason didn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she gave him a small nod. Acknowledgement, not absolution. Ladies and gentlemen! Mason grabbed the microphone from the event podium, her voice ringing across the estate. You came here for charity, to feel good about yourselves, to celebrate generosity. She gestured at Sterling with barely contained fury. But this man has been stealing from those charities for years. My father died trying to stop him. I'm just trying to finish what he started. Vivian's live stream hit 1.2 million viewers. Her chat was a wildfire, people tagging news outlets, calling for investigations, sharing the stream across every platform. The influencer girlfriend who'd started the evening filming content for engagement was now documenting what might become the biggest charity fraud scandal in California history. A businessman in the crowd, someone with actual moral courage, shouted, I donated $50,000 to your foundation last year, Sterling. Where did that money really go? Others joined in. I want receipts. This needs investigation. Call the authorities. Sterling looked like a cornered animal. His empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed image, all crumbling because a homeless teenage girl had the audacity to tell the truth. Do you think this changes anything? Sterling hissed at Mason, venom in every syllable. You're still nobody. Street trash. My lawyers will bury you before breakfast. Mason met his eyes without flinching. No, I'm Calvin Harris's daughter, and that's everything. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast. The crowd turned toward the sound. Were they police? FBI? Someone had clearly called authorities, but in this chaos, who would they arrest? The sirens grew louder, red and blue lights flickering through the estate's iron gates, and Sterling's hand moved to his phone, already dialing his lawyer. FBI, not LAPD. Federal agents in dark suits strode through the estate gates with unmistakable authority. Lead agent Sarah Brooks, 40-something with steel-gray eyes, cut through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Sterling Blackwood? She held up her badge. FBI. We've been investigating your charitable foundation for 18 months. She glanced at Vivian, still live streaming to 1.6 million viewers. Keep that camera rolling. We want this on record. The crowd parted. Sterling's face cycled through denial, rage, then pure survival instinct. He bolted for the Bugatti. I'm leaving. You can't stop me! He yanked open the driver's door, the engine still purring from Mason's repair. $40 million of escape velocity fueled by desperation. Mason moved faster. She planted herself directly in front of the Bugatti's chrome grille, arms spread wide. A 16-year-old homeless girl in oil-stained clothes blocking a billionaire's getaway. David versus Goliath, recreated in a Beverly Hills driveway. Every phone captured it. You're not running away from my father's work, Mason said. Sterling revved the engine, a threat. The crowd gasped. Would he actually run her down? On camera? In front of federal agents? Agent Brooks's hand moved to her weapon. Mr. Blackwood, step out of the vehicle. Now! For 3 seconds, Sterling's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his empire crumbling, his choices narrowing to surrender or vehicular assault broadcast to millions. He chose surrender. Brooks pulled him from the driver's seat. Sterling Blackwood, you're under arrest for tax fraud, charity embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud. We'll also be investigating a wrongful termination case from 2010 involving Calvin Harris. She turned to Mason. Your father filed a sealed complaint with our office before he disappeared. We've been waiting years for corroboration. Thanks to tonight, we finally have it. Gary Wilson stepped forward, visibly shaking. He pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. I have more. Ledgers, emails. Vincent Crawford paid me to sabotage the car, but he also sent documentation about Sterling's fraud as insurance. His voice cracked. I was going to destroy it. Keep my paycheck. But... He looked at Mason. This kid earned clean money tonight. Taught me I can't buy back integrity. But maybe I can start earning it. He handed the envelope to Agent Brooks, then turned to Mason. From his wallet, he pulled out a check. The $25,000 from Vincent. This was dirty money. You earned $50,000 from Sterling's bounty. You deserve both. He pressed it into her hands. I'm sorry. For everything. For your father. For being too weak to choose right the first time. The crowd, shame-faced by their earlier mockery, began moving. Phones shifted from recording to Venmo. Donations pinged, $50, $100, $500. Strangers moved by guilt and inspiration. Vivian announced to her 1.9 million viewers, I'm starting a GoFundMe for Mason's education to honor Calvin Harris's name. The chat exploded with pledges. Sterling in handcuffs spat his final venom. You think this changes anything? You're still nobody. Mason stepped close, pulled her father's water-damaged card from her pocket. No, I'm Calvin Harris's daughter, and that's everything. Agent Brooks handed Mason a business card. We'll need you to testify. But there's something else your father left behind. Something we've been holding in evidence. 3 months later, Mason and Keisha sat in a law office that smelled of leather and old paper. The attorney, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, slid a manila envelope across the polished mahogany desk. Your father was a careful man. He established a safety deposit box in 2010 with very specific instructions. It could only be opened if Sterling Blackwood was ever convicted of fraud. She paused, letting that sink in. Last week, the conviction came through. 12 years on multiple counts. Mason's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside, original documents proving Sterling's charity fraud scheme, complete with forged invoices and inflated appraisals, bank statements showing money laundering through fake restoration costs, and letters, 3 of them, addressed to my daughters if you're reading this. Keisha leaned close as Mason unfolded the first letter. Their father's handwriting, strong and clear. If you're reading this, then I failed to stop him myself. But you can finish it. You have everything you need. My knowledge, my tools, and something Sterling never understood. Integrity can't be destroyed, only inherited. Mason's tears blurred the words. Keisha gripped her hand tight enough to hurt. The attorney slid another document forward. There's more. Your father co-owned a small garage in East Los Angeles. When he was arrested, his partner assumed the business had died. But the deed remained in your father's name, held in trust. It's yours now, yours. Both of you. The garage was a disaster. 15 years of neglect had turned it into a shrine to abandonment. Broken windows, rusted equipment, oil stains that had become part of the concrete itself. But the bones were good, the structure sound, and hanging on the back wall, faded but readable. Harris & Sons Automotive, where broken things get fixed. Mason stood in the dusty workspace, afternoon light streaming through gaps in the roof. Keisha stood beside her, equally overwhelmed and hopeful. This place held ghosts, their father's dreams, his skills, his final sanctuary before Sterling destroyed everything. We can do this, Keisha whispered. We can bring it back. Mike Coleman appeared in the doorway, no longer in a security uniform. He'd quit Blackwood's estate the night of the arrests, unable to stomach working for that empire any longer. I brought cleaning supplies, he said, holding up industrial equipment. And I called in favors from the Veterans Network. We've got volunteers coming tomorrow. The GoFundMe Vivian had started had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. $2.3 million from strangers who'd watched a homeless girl resurrect a Bugatti and expose corruption in the same night. The comments section was thousands of messages long, people sharing their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, erased. Mason used part of the money to renovate the garage. New equipment, proper diagnostic tools, a classroom space for teaching. She installed showers and a quiet room for students who needed space. She named it Harris Legacy Auto Restoration, Second Chances for Cars and People. The mission was simple: hire homeless youth, teach them mechanics, give them skills, dignity, purpose. Everything her father had been denied in his final years. Within 2 months, she had 6 students. Kids like her, discarded by the system, invisible to society, hungry for something to believe in. She taught them to read engines the way her father had taught her, to see problems as puzzles, to understand that broken things could become whole again. Keisha, now 13, enrolled in online business courses through a scholarship program. She took over the garage's operations, scheduling, billing, inventory, social media marketing. The sisters became a perfect team. Mason's hands, Keisha's brain, their father's legacy flowing through both. Gary Wilson offered to partner with them. Mason studied him, the man who'd sabotaged her, then saved her. Redemption wasn't clean or simple, but maybe it was possible. On probation, she said. Not forgiveness, but possibility. Vivian's documentary, The Girl Who Fixed Everything, went viral. 30 million views in the first week. National news picked up the story. Mason found herself on morning talk shows, advocate panels, congressional hearings about homelessness and youth programs. But fame felt hollow. One night, working late on a 1965 Mustang restoration, Mason's composure finally cracked. The success, the recognition, the vindication, none of it filled the hole her father's absence had carved. She slid down the Mustang's fender to sit on the oil-stained floor, tools scattered around her, and sobbed.
Dad, I wish you were here to see this,
she whispered to the empty garage.
I wish you knew we won.
He does know, kid. Mike Coleman sat down beside her, his old bones creaking. Your dad's here every day. Every time you give some lost kid a chance, every engine you bring back to life, that's him, working through you. Mason wiped her eyes on her sleeve, leaving grease smears on her cheeks. I used to think fixing the Bugatti would fix everything, prove something, but it didn't bring him back. No, Mike agreed, but it brought his truth back, his name, his legacy. He gestured around the garage, at the students' workstations, the tools on the walls, the hope hanging in the air like motor oil mist. This is bigger than one car, one night, one victory. This is permanent. Mason pulled out the water-stained notebook from her backpack. She'd salvaged it from Sterling's fountain, carefully dried each page, preserved what she could. She opened to the last page, her father's final entry, written 3 weeks before he died. To whoever finds this, broken things can be fixed. Broken people can too. Never stop trying. The world will tell you some things are too damaged, too far gone, too expensive to save. The world is wrong. Everything and everyone deserves a second chance. Calvin Harris. Mason traced the words with her finger, feeling her father's presence in the ink. The next day, she attended an auction, not to buy, but to witness. The 1936 Bugatti Type 56 SC Atlantic, seized as evidence and now released, was being sold. A museum in Detroit purchased it for $38 million. They announced the display would be dedicated to Calvin Harris, master mechanic and unsung hero, the man who built what others could only admire. Mason stood in the auction house watching the car roll away on a trailer. It looked different now. Not like Sterling's trophy, but like her father's masterpiece finally getting the recognition it deserved. A woman in her 70s approached them, her eyes wet with tears. Your father restored my late husband's Corvette in 2009. He taught my son everything he knows. We owe him our family business. 1 year later. Harris Legacy Auto's parking lot overflowed with cars and people, but not the kind Sterling Blackwood would have recognized. No designer gowns or champagne towers. Instead, mechanics in clean coveralls, former students in business casual, community leaders in jeans, and dozens of families whose lives had been touched by second chances. The first annual Second Chance Scholarship Gala wasn't about wealth. It was about dignity. Inside the renovated garage, now gleaming with professional equipment and hope, 17 formerly homeless youth presented their restoration projects. A 1968 Camaro rebuilt from scrap. A 1955 Thunderbird brought back from rust. Each car a testament to what broken things and broken people could become. Keisha, now 14 and poised beyond her years, stood at a podium addressing 200 guests. My father used to say that every engine has a story. Every dent, every oil leak, every failing part. It all means something. Her voice was strong, clear. The same is true for people. Our dents don't define us. Our repairs do. The crowd erupted in applause. Mason watched from the side, pride swelling in her chest. Her little sister had become a voice for the voiceless. "And now," Keisha continued, "my sister has something to show you." Mason stepped forward as a curtain dropped. Behind it, a perfect replica of the 1936 Bugatti Type 56 SC Atlantic. Not the original. That belonged to history now, to her father's memory in a museum. But this one, built entirely by the Harris Legacy youth team over 9 months of meticulous work, belonged to them. "My father couldn't afford to own the original," Mason said, her hand resting on the gleaming hood. "But he knew it inside and out. Every curve, every mechanism, every secret." She looked at her students, her team, her family. "This is for every person ever told they don't belong near beautiful things. You do. You belong everywhere." The replica's engine, hand-assembled by homeless teenagers who'd been written off by society, started on the first turn. The sound was perfection. The crowd went wild. Gary Wilson, now a full partner in Harris Legacy, stepped forward with an announcement. "We've secured partnerships with 6 trade schools across California. Starting next month, we're creating direct pipelines for homeless youth into skilled careers. Mechanics, welding, electrical work, real jobs with real futures." Mike Coleman followed, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm officially adopting 2 kids from our program, Marcus and Elena. They're family now." The garage exploded with cheers and tears. Mason had to wipe her eyes. Vivian, who'd pivoted her entire platform to social justice content, interviewed Mason for her 3 million followers. "What would you say to people facing impossible odds?" Mason held up her father's grease-stained notebook, now preserved in a protective case, but still carried everywhere. "My dad wrote, 'Every engine has a solution. You just need the right tools and the courage to try.' Same with life. You might not have the fancy tools. You might not look like what people expect. But if you have knowledge, courage, and refusal to quit, you can fix anything." The camera pulled back, capturing the scene. Young mechanics laughing with mentors, families embracing, cars gleaming under industrial lights that had once illuminated only abandonment. Outside, a new face pressed against the garage window. A boy, maybe 15, Latino, clearly homeless. His clothes hung loose, his backpack held together with duct tape. But his eyes held that same hunger Mason had felt a year ago. The hunger to matter, to belong, to prove the world wrong. Mason noticed him. Always would. She walked outside, extended her hand. "You look lost. Want to learn something?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Mason smiled. Her father's smile, the one that said everyone deserves a chance. "First rule, everyone stalls sometimes, but we can fix anything." She led him inside. The Bugatti replica sat center stage. Students gathered around it with pride. The boy's eyes went wide. "You built that?" "We built that," Mason corrected. "And you can too." The camera split screen. Sterling Blackwood in prison orange, working laundry detail in a federal facility. Mason Harris teaches a new student to rebuild a carburetor, her hands guiding his with patience their father had taught her. Text overlay appeared. "Harris Legacy Auto has trained 52 homeless youth. 43 are now employed full-time. Sterling Blackwood serves 12 years for fraud. Calvin Harris's name has been cleared." Mason's voice came as a final whisper, meant for her father, meant for everyone. "Sometimes the broken things fix us, and sometimes we're exactly what the world needs, right when it thinks we're nothing." The Bugatti replica's engine purred. Perfect. Complete. Alive. What's your story of second chances? Share below. And if you know someone who needs hope today, tag them. Let's fix what's broken. together.